Alrighty, it's chapter number 2 of What a Wild Spirit Brings by Lil. When she awakened, she was hungry, so started scavenging for herbs and berries. She had been oblivious to her surroundings when she collapsed to sleep the night before, but now found herself trapped in a cage of trees in every direction. They were all tall, all lush with late spring leaves that cast shadows on the ground around her, and she felt very vulnerable. She shook her head at herself when she realized she was scrambling about like a frightened rabbit, dashing from bush to bush, and stood tall right where she was behind some ferns. There were no animals about, and though she lacked any sort of a weapon, she had never been afraid in a forest before and shouldn't be now. She frowned at herself for being a coward and trod more bravely as she made her way in search of food. If she were clever enough to get her books back, and fast enough to outrun her father, and strong enough to leave the poverty and the labor-filled village of Timble, then she was certainly no coward, and would make it on her own just fine. Hadn't she always been on her own anyway? The tree-tops, suddenly moved by a breeze, all seemed to nod their approval at her. She wandered a while and found, by sheer good fortune, a field of wild strawberries. She risked the thistles also growing there, and filled her stomach with the red fruit. She was actually feeling happy and proud of herself. Lil was free to do anything, go anywhere, write and draw and live as she wanted for the first time in her life. Happy wasn't a strong enough word. The field became a haven, spreading before her like a green and crimson carpet, edges fenced in by rows upon rows of tall trees. Birds and bees chirped and buzzed there constantly, meandering around, unconcerned with the loitering girl basking in the delicious scent and warmth of the place, berry juice staining her smiling face. There was no work to be done here, no one to hide from, and no impending marriage to a man decades older than her. She stayed at the field, since it was a solid source of food for a while, and made drawings of the animals that came to eat there, the days running into each other. Deer came in the morning, along with rabbits. During the day, bears and mice and birds feasted, and in the evening raccoons and possums and other rodents and more deer. None of them seemed bothered by her, and she was afraid of none of them. It was warm out, and so she began to wear her coat and gown only at night, since alone. There was no one to chide her for being bare, and no men to harm her. She did long for a water source, though, for she was beginning to smell. She didn't mind being as she was. Some part of her reminded her in a smaller voice each day that she was behaving like an animal. But as that voice dimmed, contented peace settled into her flesh, slowly, soothing, like heat from the sun. She had no real chores. She had not something new and fascinating to observe and draw each day. She napped in the trees in the air sweet with honey and strawberries. She was naked, and felt for the first time like she had nothing to fear. Then one day there were horses with bridles in her field. Terror struck her for a moment, but these were all well-bred horses, with oiled saddles, nothing her father would ever be able to afford. She found the owners of the beasts, and they were women, 6 of them, and they all had baskets and wore very fancy dresses, ones unlike any of the woolens she had ever worn. They were also very clean and had an air about them that said they must be nobles. 2 of them were younger, more her age, with dark hair, and one of the older women wore a golden strand around her head, which bore a small white jewel dangling over her forehead. Lil shivered. A Haldani. Haldani were the only women in the world, other than the Queen of Andrus, the only country she knew of that allowed females to rule, that had power. No man could deny Haldani their rights, for they were in tune with the elements somehow, and able to channel the earth and the air and the water and fire as they willed, with runes chained to their waists. Haldani were to be feared, and were peacekeepers of the world. Look! One of the younger women had spotted her, pointing her out. Damn! She tried to run, but the ground suddenly came up around her feet and held her in place, almost to her knees. The Haldani had her. Damn, damn, damn! Oh my, she's naked, said one woman, the eldest of the group. She's a mess. Poor child, said another. Do you suppose she's wild? Asked the girl that had announced finding her. As the Eldani stepped in front of the girl she had captured, a rune floating in the air at the length of a chain, glowing green behind her, Lil decided she would be wild. Maybe they would let her go. Maybe. What is your name, girl? Lil remained silent. She just glared at the Haldani and hoped she looked untamable. She smiled a little when she realized she actually was, having run off to live alone naked in the woods and all. Do you speak? Asked the old one. No reply. Oh, she is wild! The girl was clapping her hands and jumping up and down as if she discovered a new pet. That girl was excited. Benda, remember yourself, said a woman who had not spoken yet. Benda immediately stopped and put on a solemn face. The other girl had kept her face composed the whole time. She had dark, blue, brooding eyes and seemed harder and yet more like she was something untamable herself. They liked her for that. We simply must bring her back to the stead and clean her up, spoke the woman who had said she was a poor child before. The other one other than the one who was still glaring at Benda, perhaps her mother. "Indeed, Micna," said the Haldani, as if she wasn't convinced yet that Lil wasn't as animal-like as she was pretending to be. The earth began to crumble from her legs, but the air around her at the same time became hard behind her and to her sides, while another room, golden this time, floated without wings behind the Haldani, tethered by the same fine silver chain. She could only go forward, but she had no intentions of going, so she stood where she was. There was a little prod of air from behind, but she stood. Next came a smack on her bottom, and she remained. Finally a shove made her stumble with one foot, but she caught herself and stood back up immediately. "Stubborn," the Haldani stated. Lil wanted to smile. She was so proud of herself in that moment. Not even a Haldani could tame her. "Why not just make her move?" asked Benda's mother. "I have no intention of beating the child," the Haldani said. Then the girl who was not Benda turned away and began to walk toward the horses, apparently bored. Lil didn't know why, but that irritated her, and she found some reason to step forward because of it. Every woman seemed shocked, even the Haldani, except for the girl herself. She gave a glance back to see who was following her, and then dismissively sniffed, and kept on as if nothing were there worth noting. She was a snob, but Lil still liked her. She was composed and each movement was exact, each expression precise and devoid of emotional involvement, a real rule follower, and yet she was defiant at the same time. Lil could sense it somehow. She was a creature of passion and life under the mask. Lil would come back later for her books. The women tried to put a shawl over her shoulders, and she shrugged it off. They put it back, and she shrugged it off again, over and over them, growing frustrated, and Lil stifling laughter. "Demean, will you tell your new pet to put something on? We're almost to the stead, and she cannot just walk in naked." The quiet, resolved girl looked mildly annoyed about it, but obeyed. She looked Lil deeply in the eyes and pulled the shawl around her. Demean turned back to walking her horse, and Lil didn't shrug it off. She liked giving Demean more power than the others, more than even a Haldani. It meant she had power over all of them, and that was a first for her, having power. She was enthralled with it. Their stead was a huge mansion in the woods, with a long cobbled path up to it big enough for 2 carts. The structure towered over gardens and trimmed hedges. Lil fought between gaping at the place and remembering she was supposed to be wild and not care about finer things. Entering the grand doorway, she was immediately led by the entire group, except the elderly woman, to rest chambers. Servants brought buckets of warm water and sponges on command, while the wealthy women studied excitedly this fun, wild girl. Benda insisted with smiling anticipation that she would be the first one to wash her. Lil made them chase her when they tried to sponge her on clean, and she made them wrestle her when they tried to pull clothes on her. She even ate her bowl of soup with her face and hands, ignoring the utensils as if she'd never seen them before. Demean never involved herself until asked to, and never acknowledged the girl following her around the whole day long. The others all seemed glad for the entertainment, if a little frustrated with the effort required. That night she followed Demean into her room like a dog, and curled up on the end of her bed at her feet. Demean seemed not so annoyed once the door was closed and they were alone. She even patted her head before lying down for the night. Lil fell asleep smiling until her face hurt. Chapter